Joining us now, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, is with us. By the way, his brand new book is out. It's doing very well on Amazon. It's called Vengeance. And it's basically taken from the headlines novel that I started reading, and I really can't put it down. And welcome back. How are you?
Well, it's great, and it sounds like, I was born in Harrisburg, so it sounds like you had a great time. In fact, I'm going to go there for my niece's, Lauren is getting married this weekend. I'll be back in Harrisburg. Sounds like you had a great time there.
Yeah, well, I really did. And you know what? As the president said last night, this is the heart and soul of America. These are people that work hard, play by the rules, make this a better country. They raise their families, obey the laws, pay their taxes, and just make it the world a better place. I, like you, am not as optimistic. The president laid out a great plan last night. I'm not as optimistic as I'd like to be that this is all going to get done.
It's all going to come down to the Senate and finding 50 votes, and I think the House is going to pass it. I think Paul Ryan will have done his job. Now we got to find a way to get to 50 votes to Senate. But I must say, I thought the president was selling about as well as I've heard him in a long time. I thought he's on his topic. He knows it. He understands it. He's enthusiastic, and I thought it was very effective on your show.
I thought he was too, and this is what we need done now. You have asked, for example, the president and Bob Corker to stop having intramural battles and intramural fights. Okay. Right. I think but don't the people in the Senate now realize that I walked around the crowd last night for an hour and I interviewed people. We're going to show some of those interviews tonight. And I asked people basically three questions. What they thought of the president. All right. It might be a biased crowd. They're there to see the president. And then it was overwhelmingly positive, no negatives. Then I asked about Congress. It was almost universally negative. And then I asked about the media, and you can predict the media's response.
Right.
All right. But Mitch McConnell has an 18% approval rating in his home state.
I mean, the Congress has a simple cure: pass the tax bill. If they pass a really big tax cut and people see it and feel it in their pocket, that's going to have a direct, decisive impact. And Congress's ratings are going to go up. If McConnell, as he apparently is working on it, starts getting a bunch of conservative judges approved, their ratings are going to go up. I think people are reacting to what they see, and people want action. You've heard me say that if you're going to drain the swamp, the alligators are going to fight back, which is true. But people are cheering for draining the swamp. They're not cheering for the alligators. And I think that's a big thing for Republicans in the Senate to remember, and frankly for Democrats to remember. I mean, I like the more the president talks about, Democrats ought to vote for this tax cut too. I mean, let's put some pressure on the Democrats. How does a guy like Manchin, with the president having carried his state by a huge margin, doesn't he want to at least think about voting for this? And I think there are a number of Democratic senators who might take a look at this thing, and suddenly you may have a little extra margin than you thought you did.
Yeah. So how does this get done between now and Christmas or now and Thanksgiving?
Well, the Senate's got to pass the budget resolution. That means you can then pass the Senate, the tax bill with 50 votes. The House is apparently ready to start marking up the bill in Ways and Means now, which is about within a week of what Ryan's schedule originally was. The next thing is to get Senator Hatch to agree that as soon as the bill's marked up in the House, he'll start marking it up in the Senate. And the president and Mitch McConnell, they got to put all these petty things aside. They got to decide they're on the same team. They got to sit down with guys like Corker and get things worked out, talk it through, and they got to build 50-plus votes. And then, frankly, I think they should go and put some real pressure on the swing Democrats in the 10 states that are up for re-election that Trump carried, and see if they can't push 5 or 6 of them into voting yes. And there's no reason this has to be a cliffhanger. This is a good tax cut bill. The president, I think, is a good salesman for it. The country wants it. There's going to be overwhelming support for tax cuts. And I think you can make a pretty simple case. You want more money in your pocket or more money in Washington? And I think the Democrats are going to pay a real cost if they say, no, the money belongs to the swamp. The money doesn't belong to you.
I thought one of the more interesting parts of the discussion, because basically the plan is what he ran on, with the exception of the corporate rate going to 20%, and Paul Ryan and others convinced, and that's the only rate they're going to be able to get based on past laws, a reconciliation in the Senate, et cetera. And I'm like, okay, it gets complicated. I understand. But every other part of it, it's interesting that
it's still a cut from 35 to 20, and then puts it slightly below the world rate, which is 22. I mean, if he gets a 20% corporate rate and they get a big pass-through for small business and they get a middle-class tax cut and they get this money back from overseas, that's a pretty big win.
Well, I think it's a really big win because it's a win for the American people. The repatriation is going to put trillions back in the economy. Also, we're going to get a lot of money back in the economy because corporations will now start investing in factories and manufacturing centers. Then you're going to have the middle class with, on average, about a $2,000 per family reduction in their taxes every year. That's serious money. So I think it's all good.
Yeah, and that's why I've said, you've heard me say now for 6 months, the key test is getting this tax bill through, getting it signed into law, preferably by Thanksgiving, so that they have a big impact on the first and second quarters. If we can run for re-election in 2018 as the party of jobs and prosperity and take-home pay, we got a pretty good thing to argue. But then we got to go back and clean up health care. We got to do something in infrastructure. But the whole centerpiece of this game is the tax cuts.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. By a million percentage points, that's true. What about what the president did on health care today? I think what he did was absolutely brilliant. And what he's allowing to have happen, and he's using a loophole the corporations have used since 1974. And that is that if you're a corporation and you have offices in different states, you're allowed to buy insurance for your entire corporate team. And that means all of your workers across state lines, one plan. You're not beholden to state laws. And in this case, you won't be beholden to Obamacare or ACA regulations. So that would mean that somebody that, a group of people that work in the National Restaurant Association, coast to coast, they would be able to buy across state lines with the buying power of a big group and the competition that would be associated by going to any state that they wanted to go to.
Well, I think it's got great potential. I think that you've got, I've always been for association health plans. I think you could have the National Federation of Independent Businesses, the American Farm Bureau. You suddenly have lots of people who had been trapped in the individual market could now join their association, buy collectively, bring down their costs, increase competition, increase desirability of working with them. There'll be a lot of details to work out, but I think it's exactly the right direction. And I think 5 or 6 big steps like this will help fixing the health system, despite the inability of the Congress to repeal Obamacare. Yeah,
well, and that's been a big obstacle to them. What do you think of this whole Harvey Weinstein issue in this sense? That the criticism, number one, that you had the New York Times and NBC have opportunities to break this story wide open and they buried it. Then you've got every Democratic politician, they buried it. Then you find out everybody in Hollywood knew about his atrocious behavior and nobody spoke up.
Look, I think there's a culture of sickness on the left. And that they protect each other and they cover for each other. You're seeing it begin to break down in Silicon Valley. You're seeing it begin to break down in Hollywood, and I think it's going to continue to happen. But it also, as you point out, there's a fascinating study here of the pathology of the news media. NBC, not just on this story, but on a whole series of things, NBC has been very strange recently. The degree to which NBC went off the deep end of gun control, for example, was very, very odd. And I think that the Harvey Weinstein story, what makes it interesting to me is it's this dual story. It's both the story about this guy who's clearly an exploiter and a blackmailer and a guy who buys off people, but it's also the story of the culture around him and the news media around him and the way it was manipulated. I mean, somebody's going to do a great book that pieces all this stuff together, and it's going to be shocking how sick the system was. And it's a further step in undermining the American public's belief in the news media, because you now know that there were lots of people who had a really powerful, explosive story, and they sat on it. They refused to do it.
It's really sad. All right, stay right there. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich's new book is out. It's called Vengeance, and it's in bookstores everywhere. He's also doing a tour around the country, and we have a link to my website, Hannity.com, if you want to go see the speaker when he's out and about around the country. So if you were to move forward, you really believe everything is now coming down to this tax bill? And you...
Yeah, look, I'm a Reaganite. I was trained by Ronald Reagan. And in 1981, they knew that the key to getting the economy rolling was a gigantic tax bill. And for 8 months, they didn't do or talk about anything else. They understood that. So last night's speech was great. Last night's interview with you was great. He should give nothing but tax and economic growth and take-home pay speeches and interviews from now till the bill passes.
Yeah.
There is nothing which is secondary. When you're faced with something which is this important, you have to win.
Yeah, well, I agree. I mean, you have to win. Do you have to win it this year? My argument is yes.
Right. Yes. And that means you got to focus and be disciplined and stay on the topic. And you got to recognize you need at least 50 votes in the Senate and you got to go out and even if you got arguments with people about other issues, you got to find some common ground to bring them together.
No.
And it's,
do you think, is there any, the president,
but it's not complicated.
The president seemed confident that some Democrats would go along. I don't see it.
Well, no, I mean, I think this is where I think the president ought to be out barnstorming. He ought to be in every one of those states that has a senator where the state voted for Trump. And he should be explaining for that state what the tax cut bill is going to mean for, just for Wisconsin, just for Michigan, just for Pennsylvania, just for West Virginia, just for Missouri, just for Indiana, just for North Dakota, just for Montana. All of a sudden, those local Democrats now got a problem because now they have their small business people coming to them. They got their farmers coming to them. They got workers coming to them saying, hey, why are you against my getting a tax cut?
I'm confident the House is going to get this done. I'm not confident in the Senate. Have you talked to any senators? I
talked to a bunch of senators. I think there's a belief that it can be done, but it's hard. The Senate's a very different place than the House. And I think that each individual senator has a very important sense of importance. The system was designed for that. There are only 100 of them, and each one of them knows that they matter. Many of them have very strong opinions. You're going to have a guy on today who really is helping change history, Rand Paul. I mean, he has been the champion of these association health plans. There's a great article out today, by the way, explaining why Trump was right and explaining why it's helping the American people. Yeah, well, Rand Paul's got his own strong, unique idea. Mm-hmm. There are a bunch of guys like that. And,
all right, let me ask this. So you're going on a little bit of a book tour with your new book, Vengeance. Where are you going to be?
Well, we're going to be, we just did a great book signing last night. We're going to be in Harrisburg, and then we're going to be next week in a couple of cities. I honestly don't have the list in front of me. I'm talking to you from Toronto, where I'm doing the Monk debate tonight, which is 3,000 Canadians. You can imagine the degree to which they're probably not pro-Trump.
That's going to be great.
One of the things that keeps life exciting.
I have every confidence that you'll be doing your thing and winning the crowd over. I've been there when they're hostile, and you do win them over, much to their reluctance and chagrin. All right, Mr. Speaker, thanks for being with us.